My name is Steve Hart, a 41-year-old single man. I'm a local newspaper reporter in my hometown. I harbor a secret that I can't share with anyone. Truth be told, even at this age, I have no experience with women. There are various reasons for this, but in short, I guess I don't have the guts. I've had my chances. I mean, it might sound odd, but I do get approached by women from time to time. The issue of not being able to cross that final line was always a matter of the heart. After repeatedly hurting people and letting them down, I eventually got tired of dealing with people. If we're destined to break up, I figured it's better not to date from the start. That way, neither of us gets hurt, and I won't disappoint anyone by failing to meet expectations. Once I reached this state of mind, I found peace in my heart. Sure, there's a bit of loneliness, but I've come to terms with that as a price to pay for my peace of mind. The change in my life came this spring covering the local news. I was putting together a feature on cherry blossom cookies for the upcoming season. I had the chance to make these cookies at a well-established local bakery, a small shop run by an elderly couple. Their only granddaughter, Jenny, who attracted customers as they had no successor, seemed that Jenny would eventually take over. I heard she had graduated from a culinary school with a focus on pastry arts. Thank you for today. Making these traditional cookies for the first time was a great experience. I said to Jenny while enjoying the cherry blossom cookies that I made myself. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I must say, seeing you in an apron was priceless. I had met her a few times at local Chamber of Commerce parties. She was always surrounded by a lively crowd, and I could never get close to her at these events. It seems that she had properly found me, who usually drinks a small beer in the corner of the banquet hall. I always thought you were quiet and cool, so seeing you in a white apron was quite a surprise. I wish I had taken a picture for memory, she chuckled, remembering the scene. I felt a bit embarrassed. She's the face of this shopping district, a local icon with her cheerful personality and charm. She's quite the celebrity around here. Although she is concerned about being over 30 and wants to give up the face of the shop, she's still popular. Cool vibe. That's the first time I've heard that. As I showed my surprise, she shook her head. Seriously, no way. You must know that there are plenty of girls after you, Steve. Leaning towards me, she said this, and I could feel my face flushing. She smiled at me from a distance where I could clearly see her pretty nose and well-defined eyelashes. So, I'm going to take a shot here. Please, will you be my boyfriend, Steve? What? It was so sudden that I thought my ears had gone crazy. You don't want to. As she looked up at me inquiringly, I didn't know how to respond. She was charming, and she seemed to have quite a liking for me. I didn't dislike her. In fact, I might even say that I like her. But it's not that I don't like you, Jenny. I just can't be with anyone. I don't have the courage to date. I tried to respond to her feelings honestly. I told her that I didn't plan on dating anyone. She seemed to think for a moment, then quickly smiled at me. But I like you, Steve. Don't forget that. I want to continue liking you. If I ever stop liking you, I'll tell you. She said this and put her hands together as if praying. Her fingertips were slightly trembling. Upon hearing my response, she seemed to relax, the tension leaving her shoulders. From that day forward, Jenny and I started seeing each other more often. Most of the time, it was her who initiated it. To avoid giving her false hopes, I refrained from inviting her myself. I should probably refuse her invitations altogether, but I couldn't be cruel enough to turn her down. My indecisiveness might be hurting her. It might sound arrogant, but it's true that my heart takes every time Jenny invites me. Would you like to go to this great seafood restaurant I found? Day to day, Jenny had contacted me. She was always finding delicious places to eat or fun events and inviting me. As a local reporter, I really appreciated her suggestions. We arranged to meet at the restaurant over the weekend. The thought of seeing her bright smile made the weekend seem a bit more exciting. On the day of our meeting, Jenny, who is usually punctual, was unusually late. She is usually there before me, waiting with both hands to greet me. I was feeling anxious because she wasn't at our meeting place. She didn't show up even after 5 minutes. Thinking she might have had an accident, I was about to take out my cell phone to contact her when I heard, "Sorry to keep you waiting," and felt a tap on my shoulder. When I turned around, there was Jenny, looking a bit tired. "I'm sorry I kept you waiting. I was the one who invited you. I'm really sorry." Jenny deeply bowed her head as she said this. "No worries at all. More importantly, are you okay? Anything happened?" As I spoke, she lifted her head. The moment she did, I was taken aback. She was shedding tears. Passers-by glanced at us. There I was, looking like a jerk making a woman cry on the street. I felt hopeless, not knowing why she was crying. I suggested we sit somewhere and guided her to a bench. During the walk, she kept repeating, "I'm sorry," while her tears continued to flow. I was worried about what could have happened to her, my heart racing. After seating her on a park bench, I went to a vending machine and bought her a warm tea. She accepted the can of tea with both hands and said in a soft voice, "Thank you." Perhaps the warm tea had comforted her a bit. Finally, I was able to stop her tears. I waited patiently for her to share what had happened. "I'm sorry I lost my composure. I've been nothing but trouble today. I'm really sorry." I tried to comfort her, smiling and saying, "It's okay. Actually, the cat I had for a long time passed away the day before yesterday. It was old, so I know it was its time. But that doesn't make it any less sad. I remember there always used to be a calico cat basking in front of the pastry shop. So that cat had passed away. I had it with me for so long." Saying that, she began to tear up again. She had been with the cat until its last moments. I could tell from her voice that it hadn't been a painless death. Still, she had stayed by its side until the end, meeting its gaze. It's hard to have your wishes come true. She kicked a pebble at her feet as if she was a bit annoyed. Life's full of unfulfilled wishes. At my words, she nodded slightly. I've never had a pet. I'd never had a chance to raise a pet since I was a child. I had no interactions with animals. My grandparents, who raised me, didn't like animals. I'd barely have any memories of my parents. I grew up under the care of my grandparents. When I asked them about my parents, they wouldn't tell me anything. I only vaguely remembered my mother's face as she said, "I'll be back soon." She left me behind, and I never saw her again. It wasn't until I grew up that I realized I had been abandoned. I had been left by my mother. Since I didn't remember my father at all from the start, I didn't miss him. But about Mom, I have been so lonely. But I could never forgive my mother who just said, "I'll be back," and left me behind. That's why I find it difficult to form relationships with anyone. The fear of getting close to someone, knowing we might eventually part ways, is overwhelming. The thought of waiting for someone to leave me, just like my mother did, is unbearable even to imagine. When I became an adult, I could have adopted a pet, but I never did. I would eventually have to see them off. Just imagining it was painful. I confessed to my girlfriend that I can't keep pets because I can't bear to think of losing them. She looks at me surprised. It's the first time I've talked to her about myself. "Thank you. I learned something important about you, Steve." The face that was crying a while ago turned into a gentle smile. She smiled as if to cheer me up. In the end, I decided to go home without having the seafood we were supposed to eat that day. When we reached the exit of the park, she stopped. She put her finger on her lips and said, "Shay." We could faintly hear a kitten mewing. She quietly approached where the kitten's voice was coming from. Her figure disappeared into the thick of the flower bed. When she came out of the thick, she was holding 3 kittens in her arms. "I found them," she muttered, seeming a bit stunned. But still, she lovingly looked down at the kittens. "What will you do?" "Take them to the police station." She looked puzzled at my words. I'm going to take them home. I plan to raise them. What? But won't you be heartbroken again? Why aren't you scared? My true feelings slipped out spontaneously. I mean, just a while ago, she was crying about parting with a cat, and now she's picking up abandoned kittens. I can't even understand that in a few years, another heartbreaking parting will be waiting. Rather than imagining the future sadness, there's something more important. Jenny said this with a slightly sad smile. Are you afraid of dating me, Steve? Her words hit the bullseye for me, and I am at a loss for words. I felt a cold sweat trickling down my back. I won't leave you, Steve. Can't you trust me just a little bit? In Jenny's hands, the kittens were looking at me. She was looking at me with the same pure eyes. I thought that if I couldn't take a step forward here, I would be alone forever. I may not be perfect, but I'd appreciate your understanding. At my response, Jenny nodded vigorously and laughed, saying, Leave it to me. Half a year after we started dating, it came time to greet her parents. I had met her grandparents, who run a traditional bakery, several times, but this was the first time meeting her parents who live in a different place. Fortunately, her parents warmly welcomed me. I was tense all the time, but it seemed to be okay. My name is Steve Hart. I'm in a relationship with your daughter, with marriage in view, I said as I moved to bow in their direction. When I raised my face, her mother, Emma, covered her mouth with both hands, looking at me with a surprised expression. Har, you said Steve, right? Excuse me, but is your mother named Lisa? Why was my mother's name coming from Emma, whom I had met for the first time today? I was so surprised that I couldn't respond immediately. Her parents were waiting for my answer, holding their breath. Taking a small, deep breath to compose myself, I replied, Yes, my mother's name is Lisa. But I don't remember much about my mother after she left me at my grandparents' house. She never came to pick me up. There was no point in lying. I told the truth. Upon hearing this, Emma began to shed large tears. You resent your mother, don't you? Her voice was shaking with tears. Yes, if I said I didn't, I'd be lying, I admitted. At my answer, Emma began to sob uncontrollably. Her husband quietly hugged her. I was confused by her repeatedly apologizing to me in a low voice, saying, I'm sorry. As if she had sensed something, Jenny stood up and brought a picture from the shelf, handed it over to me quietly. I looked at the photo. In it were her smiling parents and my vaguely remembered mother, standing shoulder to shoulder. Wait, this is my mom. With her emotions settled and tears finally stopped, Emma began to speak slowly. My mother and her parents had met in Colorado. My mother was a photographer who accompanied high-altitude mountain ring trips. Even on the day of this photo, she was in the mountains as part of a TV program staff. Her parents loved mountaineering, and they had encountered my mother several times up on the mountains. Not long after this picture was taken, Emma slipped and fell, calling for help. My mother ran down the mountain as fast as she could. Apparently, the radio that the staff had brought along was unusable due to an error. As a result, Emma, who had slipped, was rescued by the rescue team that my mother called for. But my mother, it seems she had a heart attack at the mountain cabin and never returned. My mother was the savior of Emma's life. What a coincidence. But why did my grandparents hide the truth about my mother? I had always thought my mother abandoned me. She didn't abandon you. She just couldn't come back. When I later confirmed it with my grandparents, they said that it was my mother's dying wish not to tell me about her death. My mother, who was a professional photographer accompanying high-altitude climbers, had always said she didn't want me to know if she ever died on the mountain. She didn't want me to hate the mountains. My mother loved the mountains. And if I didn't know she had passed away, I wouldn't have to grieve, she used to say. I think it's a selfish claim, but somehow I felt like I understood my mother's feelings. It's such a strange connection. Must be your mother's mischief, Emma said with a gentle smile. I will definitely make Jenny happy, I declared clearly to her parents. The next moment, Jenny hugged me happily. I'm not alone anymore. Thinking so made me feel more determined. When the wedding preparations were in full swing, I stayed at her apartment for the first time. It's embarrassing, but it was my first night with her. As the weather forecast announced the arrival of the harsh winter, it was very cold. She was excited and said, I got a new heater. I was nervous, and my hands were sweaty. Gently, okay, just as she whispered, and I gently reached into the heater. I heard a cat's voice. I tried to pull my hand out quickly, but it was a moment too late. I felt a sharp pain on the back of my hand. Ouch, it got me. When I pulled my hand out and checked, I had 3 scratch marks on the back of my hand. Oh, I thought you two would get along, she said with a disappointed face. Now, my nemesis are the kittens she picked up that night. Although they're kittens, they've grown quickly. It seems they don't like my presence, and they're on guard against me. Ever since I first set foot in the apartment, attempting to touch the peaceful kitty under the heated blanket, I was immediately rebuffed. Since we'll become a family once we're married, I'd like to establish friendly relations with them. Tonight, however, the little guy hissed at me. They might think I'm trying to steal her from them. I, on the other hand, want to enjoy the soft feel of a cat for the first time, but I refuse and it gets me down. Hey, don't be so upset. They'll warm up to you soon, she comforts me, but a sense of anxiety lingers. Thinking too far ahead is your bad habit, isn't it, Steve? Indeed, I do often overthink the future, and it leads to a lot of anxiety and hesitation. Whenever that happens, she's always there to give me a gentle push. With a broad smile, she assures me everything will be all right. I can't tell how much I have been saved by those words spurred on, but I faced my mother's death. I dug up an old newspaper article about my mom. Together, we visited the site. Upon reaching the cabin, I found a picture of my mom among the photos hanging on the walls. In the picture, my mom had a big smile on her face. Looking at that smile, tears welled up in my eyes. She gently rubbed my back, soothingly. At that moment, an older member of the rescue team walked into the cabin. His eyes welled up as he looked back and forth between the picture and me. He smiled and said, "We've been waiting for you." He was apparently an old friend of my mom. He said he recognized me right away because I looked so much like my mom. I knew you would come visit someday. I've come this far in search of my mother's happy moments. Upon hearing this, he nodded emphatically. Then he pointed at a section of the wall and said, "Read this." There, I found messages written by regular visitors to the cabin. Among them, I found my mother's words. "Enjoy life even when you can't see what's ahead, Lisa." Finally, I received a message from my mother. Tears of joy, tears of sorrow, and tears of regret for having resented my mother all flowed out together. Unstoppable, she gently took my hand. "Next time, we'll bring our son or daughter along." "Lisa, yes, we'll come and show your grandchild." Telling this to my mother's smiling face in the photo, I felt as though she gave a slight nod. It felt as though one long journey had come to an end. Within me, from now on, my journey won't be a solo one. I'll live life to the fullest, even if the future is uncertain. That's the promise I made to my mom, because I believe that's the kind of life she wanted for me. Certainly. Here's the text punctuated and formatted into short paragraphs without missing any lines. How was that? Subscribing to our channel can motivate us to create more content. See you in our next video.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me and began to speak. "There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only." Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. "I'm leaving." After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. "I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime," he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. "To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance." As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. "Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them." It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. "Still here?" Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. "I'm leaving." I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick? What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. "Probably Sam." Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. "Do you know how much revenue we get from that company?" "We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs. Gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized." Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. "All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.